Okay, welcome. Thanks for coming. So today, as you can see, it's this. Oh no, hang on. Just checking my computer. Oh yeah. Okay. Oh yeah. What is going on? Oh my goodness. Apparently it's waking up too. Okay, there we go. Welcome. So in August, we did a general introduction to child-directed language. Last month, no, it was not last month, it was September. In September, we did a general introduction to child language. Last month, in October, we looked at phonology and prosody in child-directed language. And today, as you can see, we're looking at it in child language. And here is the proof of that. Last month in child-directed language and today in child language. Okay, some background. Um, Unsurprisingly, children's phonological awareness develops really early. So they develop a sensitivity towards the system of their language or languages long before they turn one. They learn to distinguish the relevant phonemic contrasts in their language or languages, and they're producing articulations that, as they go along, they're becoming more and more similar to the phonemes of their language, of the target language around them. And this development of phonological awareness and production continues well into the period that is covered by the sketch corpus, which is great. So generally, children have the basics of phonology down by about the age of 2.5. And then over the following years, they continue to acquire some more complex aspects of phonology, the phonotactics, prosody, things like that. So the sketch is really great because it captures, well, it's great in general, but it also captures a really interesting period of phonological development. In your sketch data, you will find lots of target-like realizations of words and also lots of non-target-like realizations of words. Well, presumably you will. And so this means that you should be able to describe salient patterns in the data. And from this, hopefully you could put forward hypotheses about developments in the area of phonology. One thing we recommend you pay special attention to are contexts where children repeat utterances that their interlocutors have produced before them. So in repeating what an adult or an older and for another interlocutor has produced just before, you know what their target is, you know what they're aiming for, and this might by comparing the child's utterance to what they're repeating, it might give you important clues to their developing phonological knowledge. And we recommend that you go about looking at the phonological development of children in the sketch by working with a list of the languages, working with a list of what you know about the language. So of the language's phonemes, allophones, and syllable structures that you find in adult language, and tick off the productions that you can see in the speech of children at each age point in your sketch data. So this is from the manual. So some questions about the phoneme inventory. So going from a list of what phonemes you find in adult speech, in the adult language, which phonemes from this list are the children using? And if you can, if you want to, if it's relevant, you can also include some observations on the differences in their productions compared to that of the adults. And then which phonemes from the list of the ones you find in the adult language are the children not using at different ages? But remember that if a child isn't producing a particular phoneme at, say, 2.5 or 3, it doesn't necessarily mean that they can't produce it and that they don't produce it. It might just be that it doesn't occur in your data. So that's an important thing to remember in general with child language. So what are they using and what are they not using out of the phonemes that you find in the adult language? So this is an example of the phoneme inventory from the Inuktitut sketch, or the phonology section in the Inuktitut sketch. So they found that at the age of 1 year and 4 months, the children used 10 of the 16 sounds. And then at the age of 1 year and 10 months, their children are using some other sounds. So you can see this is a nice way of doing it, the way it's done in the input sketch. So using this number of sounds of the possible 16 in the adult language, and then describing the sounds that they're not using, and then generalizing from that and say, so the children generally seem to use vowels, stops, and nasals before the fricatives and liquids, and then relating that to cross-linguistic work. So this can be seen generally in children's language development in other languages. And then at age 1 year and 10 months, they're using these additional sounds. So most of the ones that they weren't producing at 1 year and 4 months. So yeah, this is a nice way to describe the developing phoneme inventory of children. And here you've got some examples. So you list giving the number of the sounds they're producing, describing what they are producing and what they're not producing, and then giving examples from the sketch data of their productions using these phonemes. So at 1 year and 4 months, you can see there's the velar, the vocalization, they're producing the velar sound. And then from 2 years and 4 months, you've got an example of all 4 of these phonemes and continuing at different ages with different examples. So that's a nice way of displaying the phoneme inventory in the children's language. So moving on to substitutions and omissions. Some things we'd love you to think about is, do you regularly observe, or do you observe that particular phonemes are regularly substituted for others? Or are certain phonemes regularly omitted? So for example, the children speaking Pitjantjatjara, an Australian language, they often substitute a palatal approximant y for an alveolar trill. So that's a general finding, and you could give examples of the children making these substitutions in particular productions from the sketch data. So what is regularly substituted and what is regularly omitted? Here are some examples from Karket. So here's the list of phonemes in the language, in the adult language. And focusing on these, the alveolar trill and the retroflex, on the right-hand side of this little box here, you've got some adult words, and then the equivalent produced by children at the in the age bracket of 2 to, or maybe probably at 2 age points, 2 years old and 2.5, and the productions that are found in the sketch. So you can see that rather than the alveolar trill, in alum, that is just a guess of how you pronounce it because I do not speak Karket, they produce alum. And here is a beautiful example from Bigot's data of an older child speaking to their younger cousin who's 2 years old, and they're trying to encourage them to produce the alveolar trill, and really enjoying their attempts, the younger child's attempts. So I'll play this for you now.
Yeah, R, 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 R. R, R.
That's a really lovely example. Okay, moving on to phonological processes. Do children produce allophones and phonological processes in the appropriate contexts? And if they do, which ones do they produce? Or do they produce underlying forms? And other questions we'd love you to think about. Do you observe any non-target-like assimilations? So, for example, do they produce a consonant harmony where all the consonants within a word are at the same place of articulation, which would not be rare in children's language, is not rare in children's language. So allophones, phonological processes, in appropriate contexts, what else do they do? And non-target-like assimilations. Again, an example from Karket, language spoken in Papua New Guinea. Thank you, Birgit, for these examples. So in adult language, there are regular processes of intervocalical. So for example, for example, some alveolar sound, alveolar, velar, and labial stops might go to these other sounds. I'm not going to list them. As you can see, they're listed there. And there is a regular process of this intervocalic lenition, but there are also many exceptions. So this is the word for sweet potato. And you can see, so just looking at the forms in red. So the first sound, the velar fricative, is that follows the process of regular lenition. And then the next sound in red, the velar plosive, that first one, that's an exception to the lenition rule, which is non-predictable. And then the second one is underlyingly a geminant of the KK, the double velar double velar plosive there. So let's listen to how the adult sounds when they produce this. The adult form, I should say, but also how this particular adult sounds when they say this. We'll play it again. Okay, so that's quite complex. The underlying rules that work within this form. And understandably, the acquisition of how this intervocalic lenition does or doesn't happen in particular words is quite drawn out because it's really complex. There are regular processes, but also lots and lots of exceptions. So here's an example from a child who is 3.5. I'll play it again. So again, looking at the form, the forms in the sounds in red, they actually, if you compare the child production to the adult, which is on the right here, they actually switch them around. So the velar and sorry, the velar is in place with, yeah, they're swapped around. My words really aren't working today. I'm sorry. I should have had another coffee. Luckily, all the information's here on the slide. Okay. Moving on to consonant harmony. I tried this video earlier and it didn't work. I'm sorry because Bigot's data is delightful. I'll try it again. Yeah, no, it didn't work. Okay. Well, you have the transcript here of what the child who is 1 year and 7 months says. So essentially, the velar plosive is harmonizing with the following labial plosive. And also the child is dropping off the lateral at the end of the word. So the word you can see down the bottom here is it's the adult form, kapul, and the child is producing papu. And this pattern of consonant harmony is found in other word forms in the language in the sketch data. So that's a really nice pattern to talk about. Okay, I'm going to pass over to Rebecca now to talk about phonotactics so you can have a break from my voice and my rambly brain.
Thanks, Lucy. So this is looking at phonotactics and syllable structures. And so what kinds of syllable structures do the children produce? Are they producing complex syllable types? Are they producing codas or omitting them? What about consonant clusters? And to look at these kind of types of syllable structures is common for cross-linguistically for children to omit consonants in consonant clusters or to drop off codas and these sorts of things and just have a kind of CV, basic syllable structure. And so to look for this kind of increasing development of more complex syllable structures if that's part of the target language. And so, for instance, in Pitandera, kids often, well, the adult form of the language often features non-homorganic nasal stop clusters. So in the verb bunkanu, you've got the alveolar N with the velar K, and children often produce this as a homorganic cluster. And so there's an example it's actually in one recording, two brothers, producing it as a fully alveolar consonant cluster in Puntuno, or as a fully velar cluster at Bunkan. Another thing to look for is So if you're working on a language with tone, and everything we've talked about so far is just for the kind of purely segmental features of the phonology. If you're looking at kind of suprasegmentals, tone, but other kind of prosodic elements that are important in the language you're working on, we predict that the data available in the sketch might be less helpful for tone, because you run into potential issues of the sound quality and the data availability, but still you should be able to do some initial work on charting the use of tones by children. What tones are they using? What are you observing in terms of the tone processes that in the language that they are exhibiting? Are there any features in the tone system of the language which the children are producing in non-target like ways? And you can just kind of describe this. And kind of at what age or stage do the children start showing evidence for each of these features? What difference do you notice across the different ages? And what does the acquisition of tone look like in relation to these other phonological contrasts, such as the acquisition of consonants and vowels? And Sing and Fu 2016 has a lot more information about the acquisition of tone, which can be really helpful if you're working on a tone language. Another thing that is really important to look at is truncation of words. So we've looked at kind of what types of segments, what type of phonemes children are producing and how are they producing those. But it can also happen that children just shorten the word. So they might be able to produce all the segments in the rest of the word on their own in a shorter word, but in these cases they just shorten the word. And so to look at in what context that's happening and how that's happening and what the patterns are. So, sorry, can we go back to, sorry. And it's really important because so languages tend to differ in how children truncate the words and what parts of the words children kind of hone into as the ones that they are more likely to produce and the elements of the word that children are less likely to produce. And it's also, it connects a lot to other areas of the sketch. So looking at the morphology of the language, you might have whole morphemes that are just not produced simply because they're in a part of the word that is likely to be truncated. I'll just do that. I guess later on. So an example from Inuktitut. So here we have the mother produces the palatuk, she tripped, and then Jin at 1 year and 4 months kind of is producing the same verb, but without the subject marker at the end. So you just get the two initial syllables, pala, and that leaves out the subject agreement marker. And the same thing happens with ikukatu, where just the first two syllables, or here it's the first three syllables, iuka is produced, which is then leaving out subject agreement marker. So as Shani found, these younger children are often producing only the verb root and without either verbal affixes or the verbal inflection. So 77% of verb roots produced at this 1 year and 4 months. And So I don't quite know what she means by this. Cool. And then this reduces as the children get older with more verbs being produced with the affixes and not just verb roots. And so this could be relates to kind of the acquisition of the morphology, but also if you can connect it to phonemic processes where it's just common that the initial part of the word gets produced even in kind of non-morphologically complex words, then that's suggesting it's also a kind of phonological process. Sorry. And so see this in HMI, but kind of the other way around. So here the adult kawilo gets produced just as lo, so the final syllable of the word. And here this crosses a morphemic boundary. So you get the final consonant from il, which is the verb to see, plus the termination morpheme o. And again, kawarik, it just gets produced as the final syllable, rik, produced as lik. And again, it crosses a morphemic boundary. So you get the final consonant from the verb, this lik, plus the termination morpheme. So it's really important to look at this truncation of words. It's going to kind of flow on the acquisition of phonology and the kind of particularly these processes of substitutions is going to be really important when you're looking at the morphology and the lexicon later, because it will allow you to kind of interpret just what the child's intending, what they're producing here. But this truncation of words is particularly important when looking at these processes of morphological acquisition as well. And so we really encourage you to describe the patterns that you observe in this truncation of words, and particularly pay attention to the features of prominence in the language. So is the language a stress language? Is there a kind of edge prominence? And so are children only producing stressed syllables of longer words? Are they predominantly producing words that exhibit specific stress patterns? Are they generalizing a dominant stress pattern of the adult language and always placing stress on the same syllable and then honing in on that for production? What are their patterns of truncation for them?
Thanks very much, Rebecca. Okay, so this is one of our boxes from the manual. Just to summarize what we'd love you to look at in your section on the phonology and prosody section in children's language in the sketch. So the three core things we'd love you to look at is what is the distribution of phonemes, tonemes, and syllable structures across development. Obviously, if it's not a tonal language, we don't expect you to look at tonemes. Do you observe any target or non-target like phonological processes? And if you do, which ones are they and at which ages is this happening? And the third core thing we'd love you to look at is, do you observe any patterns in the truncation of words? And if so, which ones? Describe them, please, and at which ages. And there are lots of things you could extend on in this section as well, expand on, depending on what your data allows for and also what your interests are, what your time is, all of that. So you could absolutely continue to investigate children's use of stress. You could look at prosody as well. So do you observe any salient prosodic patterns in the children's language? For example, do children at particular ages or all ages perhaps use recurring pitch contours? If they do, and you want to describe them, that'd be great. You don't even need, if you don't want to do a prosodic analysis, you could even just describe the contour, which that would still be really useful. do that. So for examples of pitch contours they might be using, you could look at the contours in relation to the function. So are they using a particular question intonation maybe, or a particular intonation when they're using imperatives? That might be a good key into the data. And when an utterance contains two or more words, do children integrate these prosodically, or do they break them up into two or more prosodic units? So these are some examples of how you could extend on your description of children's development of phonology and prosody. Yeah, so that is all we have for this seminar today. Our next two meetings are going to be looking at lexicon and semantics. So the first one will again be like looking at the child-directed language, and that will be in December. And then the following one will be looking at lexicon and semantics in child language, just as we've done with phonology and prosody. So thank you very much. Are there any questions?
I do have lots of questions.
What a cozy crew we are today. Thanks for coming.
I guess I was more thinking of what counts as meaningful protection of the child, because once I was transcribing a speech of a very little kid. I'm not very sensitive about like how old they exactly are, but they were just doing a lot of mama 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 sounds, and I'm just like, I don't know whether I don't think they're targeting that phoneme. I know that it's probably the first phoneme they're going to learn, but do you count those as like meaningful production, or do you just let that slide, like for kids that
Definitely vocalizations when they're producing it. They're not necessarily.
You describe babbling. It sounds like so the children must be pretty young if they're doing that. Yeah. And do they have any recognizable words in the language as well? No, yeah. So I mean there is a good argument to make that babbling is a kind of way in which a sort of form of language play in which children are sorting out the articulatory apparatus for language, as well as playing around with syllables and phonemes, actually, because what you tend to find is that children's babbling quickly becomes more language-like, right? So it more mimics the target language than it would, say, random languages that you chose. So yeah, I mean, it's certainly not recognizable intentional communication, but it is the stuff of pre-language. I think I guess is the best way to talk about it. Yeah, and have been looked at in terms of phonological development, often as like predictors and things like that, or predictors of some sort. Yeah.
As long as you prefer to like vocalization, so you're not assigning any meaning to it, but they are producing it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's the example of that in Shanley sketch of inappropriate, so showing that some of these consonants are appearing earlier in the vocalizations. And so she describes all these vocalizations at 1 and 4 months.
Thank you. I was also wondering, because the phoneme inventory, like a constant phoneme inventory, not all consonants would occur at the same kind of frequency in adult speech, and which means that they're not going to occur in the same frequency for child speech either. Sorry, my cat is having her morning zoomies.
Love it.
Very busy. So the one I was transcribing is Walkery, and the adult wasn't using much retroflex approximants or laterals, and the kids are not producing them at all. So maybe they have one occurrence or two occurrences, so their like hit rate is either 0% or 100%, which means it's just hard to describe for those things. And I'm wondering whether there is a way around it to just make the adult speak more of that in front of the kids. And
so generally, so I found this exactly with the lateral approximant in the retroflex actually in Wittenberg, is that we just don't have many examples of it. But what you can do So it could just be a gap in the data, and that's just how the data works. But what you can do is look for cases where you're confident that it is in the target form. So, for instance, these kind of repetition cases where an adult produced it and then the child repeated that utterance, did they actually produce that phoneme in that case? Which would suggest that they do actually have it as part of their inventory. It's just not very frequent, and so it's not appearing in some sessions. Or did they substitute it with something else or omit it, which suggests that maybe they don't have mastery of that yet. And so I'd just be looking at, are there instances that you can identify where you very clearly expect it to be there, and then whether it is or isn't, not at sessions where you wouldn't necessarily be expecting.
And if you don't have instances like that in your data, then that's kind of just annoying. You can't really do much.
It stands to reason if something isn't commonly used in the adult language, then it will be later acquired in the child language. And that in and of itself, of course, we can't we can't use the absence of something to say it's not acquired, but you can say that it's infrequent in the adult language and the children aren't using it either. And it could either be because of the infrequency, maybe the words are adult, more like with later age of acquisition, or maybe they're just not in the recordings.
Yeah, because for the really young kids, they either just dodge it, like not producing it at all, or just producing it wrong, so it's 0%. And then I didn't get any data for kids in the middle, and then all of a sudden it became 100%. And I'm just like, that doesn't look too great.
Yeah, but no, then that's exactly kind of what you're finding is that earlier you've got evidence that they don't have it, and then later you've got evidence that they do have it, and then that helps you. Yes, this study isn't going to really be helpful for the acquisition of that particular phoneme, but now you've got a good idea of what window to focus on for a study.
It's just that for the other ones, like the retroflex stops, you can see like a clear line of the children like slowly having a raising rate, and that one's just like from the bottom to the top and no idea what's going on.
Yeah, I think that sounds like a data sparsity problem, right? Like because if the retroflex stops are more frequent, then maybe you're getting a better idea of the developmental trajectory there. But with the more infrequent ones, you're just not finding examples because of the sparsity of the data. You're not finding the intermediate examples, for instance, especially if they're dodging it. Right?
Although your retroflex examples sound great.
I know, because I did notice the kids at first just produce the retroflex as normal alveolars. They never do palatals, they always do, or other ones, they always do alveolars. And then at some stage, I can't do it qualitatively, but I feel like their production of that little alveolar plosive in place of their retroflex got a bit longer. The duration got slightly longer. And I was thinking maybe they were like holding a place for that kind of tongue curling to happen in the future, but don't have quantitative data for that.
Cool.
It's a good theory.
I mean, the nice thing about things like this is you can easily experimentally probe these things. If you ever get to go to the community and do just repetition, like non-word repetitions or a word repetition actually is fine for these types of things. And you would be able to identify that and probe it in a much better way.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. And the purpose of the sketch is to give an overview of general language acquisition and to highlight the areas that, like, to inform future research. And so this kind of data wouldn't necessarily be the best data for doing a in detail description of the acquisition of these particular phonemes, but now you've got a lot of helpful guiding information for designing such an experiment and looking at what ages you should be targeting.
I think that kind of stuff's super helpful too for like teachers and maybe like health professionals also. Because if they're sort of saying, I'm really worried because the child isn't producing this particular sound, you can say, well, actually it's really infrequent and you wouldn't expect them to be doing it at say age 3 or age 4 or something like that.
Absolutely.
I can ask a question.
Yeah.
Before that, yeah, with babbling is really important. I think it's really important. It really tells you about those things that are kind of flexible and can be quickly influenced by language specific um, characteristics, or and they already show up in babbling, like even before the first year of life, and those things that are um, not as easily influenced. So the only study I've really read about babbling was on Berber. I think Sophie Kern, you know her, Evan, I think.
Sure.
And yeah, so these kids, they get exposed to this language that is very consonant heavy, a lot of long clusters, and what they do is that they show a preference for open syllables, CV, but at the same time, they have a CV ratio of 1 or above. So a lot of consonants, more consonants than vowels. So although they have C, CC, CCC syllable types, they still prefer CV. But at the same time, they do a lot of the CV ratio is very high. So this tells us like, CV ratio can be quickly changed, but not the CV preference kind of bias. Yes, and speaking of CVs and syllable types, my question was, so if even if I go and spend a lot of time doing 5 hours of IPA transcription, which is 50 hours of work or something like that, or even more, I'm not gonna go and syllabify all those 5 hours and then, say, okay, these are the syllable types that they like. These are the patterns. I mean, you could use phone, but it supports like a dozen languages.
Mhm.
So you need like some sort of language specific syllabification algorithm to do that, unless there is some other source that I'm not aware of. So what do you guys suggest? How to do how to get those kind of results?
Yeah. So the method I would suggest is similar also to the phoneme acquisition, which is not to code everything. So, one way to get the phoneme, the acquisition of phoneme trajectory and also the syllable acquisition would be to transcribe everything in IPA and syllabify everything, and that's going to take a really long time. And isn't actually, well, it could get you something, but it's not. You'd better spend your time on other things. You get more for your time.
Sure.
So if you work from a list of the phonemes, it's the same if you work from a list of the target language adult syllable types and look for, are the children regularly producing this at this stage? So take the 2-year-old data, say just pick a time point and have a listen. Yes, I'm hearing bees. Tick that off. They're producing it. No problem. I don't need to code that anymore. Are they producing CV syllables? Yep, great. What about CV C syllables? Yep, cool. Ticked off, done. And then to look at, oh, okay, I've got this case, and then to look at the non-target like productions, which are going to kind of stand out anyway, generally. And so you look at these non-target like productions, and then what can you tell from those? So have they reduced the syllable structure? If so, how? And go, oh, okay, so it looks like in this utterance, this production, they've reduced a consonant cluster. And then go, is this just this one production, or is this something that I'm seeing more generally in this child's production at this time point? Or similarly, like, oh, it looks like they've produced retroflex nasal as an alveolar. Is this just this one time, or is this a general substitution? And so to go about it that way rather than transcribing or coding everything.
Okay, so it's mostly going to be like categorical findings in terms of phonology. So okay,
Yeah,
either happens or doesn't.
Yeah. So yes, we have evidence for this. Tick. No, we don't. Yeah. And then if you are really interested or you want to go into it, then you can.
Yeah, I did it. That's what I'm complaining.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I mean, I think that the way Rebecca described it is really good, where you say, okay, at age 2 to 6, 3, and so on and so on and so forth, which phonemes are we finding given the adult phoneme inventory? And then if you wanted to delve deeper into it, you certainly could. But as a sketch, you don't need to say, okay, this phoneme is produced X more times than this other phoneme at this age. That's not the intention there. You could do that within the sketch if you wanted to, but maybe that's even better if you've transcribed something in 5 hours in IPA to reserve that for a different paper or a different in-depth study.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I didn't do a lot of prosody. So I'm not sure, how much, how many acoustic measurements you really need for that. But my impression is that you can get away with, some duration maybe, or F0 even, but maybe with, maybe F1, F2 and F3, definitely not. If you don't have some specific, so like a specific setup with certain standards. I know, I don't remember. I think in the manual it says we don't say you should do like a comprehensive acoustic analysis. And I'm just asking because I'm more interested in phonetics and phonology. And my question is like how my setup was definitely not good for acoustic analysis, and because it's naturalistic, and then you have noise, people running around, and it's a lot of people talking at the same time. But I was wondering, is there like a head worn microphone for kids available in the market?
Having to keep it on. There is, but
Yeah.
Yeah. There is. And yeah, it's a question of kind of how long are you expecting them to wear it, in what circumstances, and
2 minutes.
yeah, exactly. But and so the situations I've seen where people have used that have been more supervised, I guess. But I also wanted to say you can still do acoustic analysis with the sketch data potentially. And so I've done it for adults, and I'm working on a paper now doing it for the kids. based on these recordings. And it's just that you're not trying to analyze every token, because you're going to have a lot of tokens which are obscured by noise.
Like 95%.
Yeah, exactly. But you're going to have some tokens that come out really clearly. And so you extract your clear tokens and then go, well, what can I do with this? And how can I analyze these? And so we did it looking at kind of realization of final syllables in verbs with adult production in Pindara. And there's a kind of gradient process of elision. And yes, a whole lot of tokens weren't really usable, but kind of, verbs in utterance final position in Pitandera were just so frequent that we got enough that we could do something with and study, well, okay, what's going on here and how they're being produced. And so there's also been a study of Warlpiri, using kind of similar data and looking at, doing formant analysis of vowels. And you can get acoustic measurements out of the good tokens. It's just a matter of sifting through, and it might be a case of you might want to extend your search a little bit beyond a 5-hour bracket to look for what are some clearer tokens in the rest of your data.
So Rebecca, when you do that, are you literally just marking clear examples when you come across them? Yeah. No other way.
And I presume you were also, because you've been involved in previous research that is about the endings of verbs, yes? Yeah. So Rebecca knew that this would probably be an interesting thing to look at as well. It's not just that it was a random decision to look at verbs. She knew it was a possible point of interest.
Yeah, but it was also that, and it's about kind of picking your targets. So we knew that there was something going on with elision of final syllables, but then wanted to control the context as much as possible. And so it's like, okay, what's something that's going to be really like the most frequent? And in Pitandera, that was utterance final verbs, because that was what was most frequent.
So yeah, if possible, I think a narrow-ish focus would probably help, rather than to go, right, I got all of this, let's do acoustic analyses. You've got something I think the way Rebecca's done it is brilliant. So something she thought was probably going to be interesting, and then really narrowed it down so it's a specific context, and looked at that, and just looked at the good audio, the quality audio examples of those instances. You could also, if you impressionistically hear a particular melody a few times, to go, oh, I want to investigate that. Is there something going on there? Is that a particular melody that numerous kids use, or one kid uses it at various points? So yeah, try to narrow your focus a little bit. And
you get something. So, like, if you look, say, at your kind of core vowel productions, and you're wanting to do a kind of vowel space of those, then you can look at, okay, what are your frequent vowels, and get some tokens for those in particular contexts that are similar, and you can start to get an idea of how big is that space and guide it towards future research.
Thank you. So whoever knows the name of the child microphone, please let me know. If you have a link, I'm very interested.
Yeah, I think the real challenge is to get them to keep it on, right? Yeah.
And not touch the microphone as well.
Yeah.
Especially for kids. I mean, I think lapel microphones work pretty well. when because I guess kids probably forget about them a bit more. But yeah,
Yeah.
But even the Pelmax, you want to hide them. Like the number of times the kid took it out of the little Velcroed pocket and put it in their mouth.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and there's so much just like tapping on the microphone.
Oh, the tapping. Oh.
Yeah, they will do it for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny
Game.
that in the old days when we first started using eye trackers, they were head mounted, and so you would have to put it on the child's head, and we just couldn't get them on kids younger than 5, to be honest. And even then, so many of them hated it. They really didn't like having something on the head. It wasn't that, it was pretty lightweight, but yeah, they really, really didn't like it.
I've worn one of those old ones. I didn't like it either.
Yeah.
Oh, that's weird because we have those ultrasound headsets for phonetic studies. And I've known people bring into African communities and they loved it because it looks like what they wear for a tribal dance. And they're just like, where can I get a set of these? And in Vanuatu, it worked well as well because all the young people wanted a photo wearing it. So
Oh,
everyone was
right.
like, yes, I want to do it. So
But they weren't kids though, right? I mean, is it like when they're young children, they just don't like wearing hats and things like that. Sometimes you can disguise things by putting a hat on, so you could actually try and have a I think people do this with the head-mounted cameras actually. So they put it like attach it to a hat and then put the hat on. But even then, not every very young children will just take it off. Yeah.
The special hat might work for some, but yeah,
Yeah.
probably
That's
not
what
for
we
the
used to
young.
tell the kids in the eye tracking studies. This is a space helmet that you're going to put on and all that.
Nice.
Free around it. Yeah.
I was wondering because the consonant sequences got mentioned, I was wondering whether there is any studies on those because when I heard a few examples in Warlpiri and Light Warlpiri, I think the word was something like patya. It's like alveolar plosive followed by palatal glide, and then they always do a patya, like taking the place of articulation from the second one and the manner of articulation from the first. But they don't have many more of those that I actually saw. So I'm wondering what it is like for like other languages that have been looked at for these consonant clusters or sequences.
I don't know. It sounds interesting, but I personally don't know.
Yeah, likewise. I know that it's something that's been looked at. It's not a literature I'm hugely across.
The consonants themselves are less studied, I think, than vowels. Like things like space in child-directed language. Abdul might have more of a knowledge because he's looking at these types of things at the moment.
Yeah, I didn't get like your exact question regarding those.
About consonant sequences, when children are producing them, do they drop one of the consonants? Do they drop the first one? Do they drop the last one? Do they take manner from one and place from the other? What do they generally do?
I thought you were asking about infant-directed speech, but yeah, in children productions, I'm not so sure. I mean, they do all of those to some extent, but I cannot tell you like which one is the most common. At least in my corpus, I'm not sure. I don't know. I'm not there yet. Yeah. I mean, some substitutions are very obvious. Um, the the ra to la is very common. Yeah, the one we saw here in the presentation. They when they have a cluster, they would drop one. I haven't looked at the patterns, so I don't know why they would drop in the beginning and the end, which ones, but they will also put vowels in between sometimes.
Were the vowels historically there? Like when adults over articulate for cues, would they put the vowels there too?
I, I I don't think so. I haven't. It's not something that I've noticed, but I'm pretty sure they don't do it. Uh, Phonetically, I'm not sure. Maybe schwas. They would probably say I every now and then. Um, but It's not, I don't think it's something systematic.
Okay, we're at the top of the hour, so thank you for coming. And as Lucy said, next month is vocabulary and semantics in the input, and followed by the same topic for child language in early January, well, mid-January, I think. So thank you, and hopefully see you next time.
Oh, I guess.
Thank you.